Scott?
Yeah.
I find cricket stats are all me and Mrs. Osman ever need. Oh yeah. Right. Of course, it was a big clash this week. Wednesday saw both Valentine's Day and Ash Wednesday, the start of Lent, so called, of course, because it's the day that Jesus smoked his last filterless woodbine before popping off into the wilderness to chill for 40 and 40. And of course, there's great history in this country. Queen Victoria, you mentioned earlier on, and Prince Albert famously got together when he organised a Valentine's Day 21 cannon salute to her in Morse code, spelling out the poem, "Hey Vic, you've set my heart a-buzzing, please don't be put off just because I'm your first cousin." So we'll allow our teams to choose love or Lent this week. Okay, well, this is the simmering despot boiler romance between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. The greatest love story ever told has enthralled the watching world for almost a decade now. Chris Christie, the former Republican presidential candidate, said that Donald Trump this week showed his what to Putin.
Oh no, there's an image I can't get out of my head.
Putin's gonna broke Trump's heart.
Yes.
He's actually said that he prefers Joe Biden because Joe's more predictable and stable. But that's nonsense. When it comes down to it, every Russian dictator loves a bad boy. He's only saying that to get Trump going, you know?
Trump came out and said that he would support Putin if he bombed any or attacked any NATO countries that didn't pay their bills when it came to NATO.
It's an incredible country, America, isn't it? You know what I mean? They elect a president, but they can only choose between the two oldest, weirdest bastards. Like nobody else. Just come on.
I think Putin respects Biden because he can only remember Stalin, whereas Biden can remember the Tsars.
I mean, it's quite a weird thing for, you know, an American former president and potential future president to encourage the Russian police.
Yeah, and everyone was really shocked. Like, the chief of NATO was really shocked, world leaders were really shocked, everyone was really shocked. And you can see why. Because to think that a man like Trump, known for his tact and his love of foreigners and his compassion towards those in need and his altruism and his measured rhetoric, for him to say something like that, naturally that is shocking. That is a shock. But it's really dangerous because NATO only works on a belief system, doesn't it? Like, people have to really believe that if you attack this country, the other country will attack. So by Trump undermining that is such a dangerous thing. You really have to all hold together to make the world believe that. It's a bit like me doing the count to 3 with my toddler. Like, if I get to 3, that's a disaster. It's really crucial that I don't get to 3. It's crucial that he believes that when I get to 3, the world's nuclear armament will descend on him at full force. And similarly, it's really important that Putin believes that he can get put on the naughty stuff.
I remember going to a NATO, on a visit to NATO, with a man who spoke very good English, but all the way through, instead of talking about the nuclear umbrella, he kept calling it the nuclear elbow. He just got the word wrong. And I realised when Trump spoke, now we finally have the nuclear elbow.
Trump could be in prison, couldn't he, by the time? I mean, he's got criminal trials coming up this week.
I think he's only got criminal trials on days ending in Y.
Oh, okay, fine. They probably will still vote for him if he's in prison. I get the feeling
the longer his sentences are, the more votes he's going to get.
If that does happen, with your knowledge of how machinations of politics works, is it more likely that they would set up an Oval Office in a jail, or that they would turn the Oval Office into a prison cell with a special bucket in the corner?
Something could you assume so? I don't think the White House has a constitutional location, so I'd be fine with that. Yes, and I think he could be in jail. I don't think there's any constitutional reason why he couldn't be in jail. So it is quite extraordinary.
Yes, it's well known that we live in merely one of the thousands, millions even, of parallel universes out there. I'm pretty sure we are stuck in the only universe in which a former and potential future president of the USA has been actively encouraging America's biggest enemy to attack NATO members if they haven't paid their subs on time. And news just reaching us that Trump has just, in addition to his other charges, he's been charged with bringing disrepute into disrepute.
If he doesn't get elected, he could always become MP for Rochdale.
I don't think he'd even be the worst candidate on that list, didn't it?
I feel like he would get on with George Galloway.
Daniel and Rachel, do you want Lent or love?
Happy to go with love.
Okay, right. On Valentine's Day this week, who helped the nation give up takeaways for Lent? There, you got both.
Is it takeaway delivery riders and drivers?
Yes.
I know, I was going to get 2 steak bakes from Greg's in South Foxy, and then I couldn't, so it was that ruined Valentine's Day. About this whole question of where do you put a picket line in a strike of takeaway drivers? Do they bring the ticket line to your house? Maybe that's what they were doing with Two Guys Elwood. They're just bringing the picket line to him.
They just bring the food cold to your front door, and then they warm it on the brazier, but still won't let you have it.
And they're striking on there because of low pay. Because the fees have come down apparently. So it's on the deliveries. You used to be able to make a decent amount of money, and now you can't. And I think that's because everybody at some point will work for Deliveroo. I think there are so many Deliveroo food delivery drivers out there. There's actually nobody left to deliver to. It's a dangerous job. I did see a little delivery man not right not so long ago. I think he was alright, because I was a bit manky. But my brain, just all it could imagine was a couple on a sofa just looking at a stationary blue dot on an iPad.
Yes, workers from the takeaway apps including Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eats down their insulated carrier boxes on Valentine's Day in a protest over pay, working conditions, and the fact that they get insufficient gratitude for their role in magicking din-dins out of thin air at the press of a button. Moving on now, the score's tied at 6 points all. Let's have an economics question now. It was confirmed this week that the United Kingdom has entered what?
Dark ages.
That may well be correct.
Recession, but the thing that's been confusing is always talk about technical recession. And I'd love to know what the difference is between a recession and a technical. Maybe you know it. That's the sort of thing Andy does to me. He turns around and maybe you know. What is it? What is the difference?
A technical recession is one that plays with a really high front elbow. Slightly forward and back.
Ronald Reagan did that to Jimmy Carter. He said that a recession is when your neighbour loses their job. A depression is when you lose your job. And a recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his job.
We're in a mild recession, aren't we? Sort of a mild recession.
Which is not what we need.
Yeah.
We need a proper recession.
Right.
80s recession, so we can get good music.
Right. Well, let's move on to a chirpier subject. Michael Gove. According to Michael Gove, if young people in the UK cannot afford what, they may do what?
If young people in the UK can't afford me at my best, they may not have me at my worst.
He certainly thought that. I'm not sure he actually said.
Yeah, I think
If they can't afford a long-term 5-year yield tracker mortgage, then they might start burning buildings down. Because that's what holds this country together. Property ownership.
That's essentially correct.
No. I've never been right on a question before.
Well, he said no. He said if they can't afford homes, they may abandon democracy. But he accidentally got that correct. So, I mean, politically, looming, housing seems to be becoming more and more of a issue. Well, a bit of a problem for the Conservatives that they've missed basically all their housing targets. So is this...
Actually, the big problem is they both want to assure people who've got houses already they're not going to build a house near them, and they want to assure all the people who don't have houses they're going to build a house for them.
Right, I mean, and is it a strength for the Conservatives now, or...
I think it's much more stupid.
I've got a genuine statistical question for you. This is a fact. Lee Rowley has been housing minister for an epic 3-month stint to go with his previous 7-week marathon as housing minister during the Truss Nano era. But can any of you tell me how many different ministers have been in charge of the housing brief since the Conservatives came to power in 2010? Yeah?
It was 16 ministers, although only 15 people, because he's done it twice.
And that isn't the correct answer.
There were 9 under Labour in the previous 13 years.
Yes.
And there have been 5 in the last 2 years.
Okay, and for a bonus million points, can you name them all?
You can name the last 5.
that's impressive. Go on then.
Come on, get us those points.
Rachel McLean, Lucy Fraser, Lee Rowley, Marcus James, and also Lee Rowley.
Yes, I'll give you a million points for that.
Gove has said that we can live in old shops now, right?
Yes.
I think that's very Michael Gove, and it doesn't sound like there's any downsides to that at all. You know, setting up home in an old abandoned Snappy Snaps, build your life in a former chippy, start a family in a haunted Woolworths. It's free pick and mix, isn't it? You know, we never renovated, foam shrimps don't go off. They go hard, but they don't go off.
Rishi Sunak said this recently to Zoe. We're going to introduce a new law to make it easier for what to be turned into what.
Water into wine.
Is it brownfields? They're going to build on brownfields?
Well, basically, yes.
Yeah. I don't like the term brownfields. It sounds like a really disappointing festival. We have a real problem in this country with housing. A, there isn't enough of it. B, the stuff that is being built is absolutely crap. The walls are so thin you can hear what your neighbours are thinking. It's not good enough. Things that we are building, I walked past some flats the other day and it was like 2 and 3 bedrooms, lifestyle choice apartments. Like, what is that lifestyle? What, just having a home is now a lifestyle. Then we use the word luxury as well. Remember when that used to mean like a double jointed sort of marble staircase and sort of swans walking around in sapphire necklaces and sort of, you know, ponds at the bottom of the garden. Now it just means if you're lucky, your breakfast bar is big enough for you to fold a piece of toast in half and just about perch it on top. It's not good enough for people. You can have a wee and hoover your entire flat in most of the places that are being built.
Move into Woolworths.
I have a solution. There's a lot of old ladies out there.
Are you pitching for your new dating show?
There's a lot of old ladies who are living in houses. It's their house, that's fair enough.
That's very liberal of you.
There's a lot of young families who are renting. So what we're going to do is develop an app where young families, young kids, can move in with old ladies. The old lady gets the joy of seeing young children again grow up, right? Because her daughter moved to Canada, right? The young family, the young kids, they move into the house there, right? They have sort of financial arrangement where they pay off her bills and they not inherit, but they kind of buy it off over time. The old lady sees the joy of children, and the young family get to live in this beautiful neighbourhood that has all the amenities at home. And it's going to be called Tender.
The immediate flaw I see with it is that I think you're wildly overestimating the joy of living with a young child.
One final question. Can any of you tell me what is a blue hedge and why has it become a problem?
Blue Hedge is the rural conservative
It is?
vote
Yeah.
in rural areas.
Yes.
There was an extraordinary article which included this term, and the headline of it is, "Why is rural England turning its back on the Tories?" accompanied by a big picture of Jacob Rees-Mogg. You must read this article, because that's really quite a puzzle. He's apparently set up a blue hedge fund.
I think Blue Hedge is what Tory ladies ask for when they get too old for a Brazilian.
You get nesting birds in there as well.
Not migratory ones, they're not welcome in this country.
Well, we are reaching the end of this week's Newsquiz, and the scores are now tied, which means we have a tiebreaker round.
And you say it's a tie, but you didn't give me a million points.
Oh no, you're quite right. So it's 12 to Zoe and Andrew, and 1,012,000 to Daniel and Rachel. Congratulations. Just some. Liz Truss has just resigned from thinking. Thank you for listening to the Newsquiz. I've been Andy Zoltzman. Goodbye.
Taking part in the Newsquiz were Zoe Lyons, Andrew Maxwell, Rachel Paris and Daniel Finkelstein. In the chair was Andy Zoltzman, and additional material was written by Cody Darling, Jane Gebby and Ben Clover. The producer was Sam Holmes, and it was a BBC Studios production for Radio 4.
fans of the late Barry Humphries are in for a treat tonight when his friend Rod Brydon trawls through the archives to examine his legacy. Comedian, satirist, actor, social commentator, painter and bibliophile, what was the man behind Dame Edna really like? Archive on 4 is at 8 o'clock. Now the weather forecast, here's Elizabeth Fitzhugh.
Thank you, Richard. Well, it's been very mild and rather spring-like of late. That mild air is set to last as we head through the rest of the weekend. And then it will be turning colder, but not cold, by the time we get to the middle of next week. Temperatures dropping back to the seasonal average. It will be very unsettled too, with now very wet and really quite windy weather to come in the forecast. And there is a band of rain approaching from the west today, so through this afternoon it's turning wet and still already. Some rain across Northern Ireland, Western Scotland, Wales, and Northwest England and Southwest England too. Northeast England and Eastern Scotland will see some brighter spells. It is turning cloudier as we head through the rest of the day. For most of Eastern England it's cloudy and it's murky with outbreaks of drizzle, but largely dry here until we get to the sea. There will be gusty winds too towards Irish sea coast of around 40 miles an hour. Still some colder, drier weather across Shetland today. Temperatures here just 6 degrees Celsius, otherwise 6 to 9 degrees across northern Scotland. Elsewhere very mild, 11 to 15 Celsius. Now that band of rain continues eastwards through this evening and overnight. Heavy, persistent rain for many. Remember, the ground already saturated in places and you could see some more surface water flooding. 10 to 15 millimetres of rain widely, 30 to 40 millimetres over Western Hills. Northern Ireland, though, turning drier, as will much of Scotland through the small hours. Western Wales, southwest England, the rain clearing with a few showers later on through the night. Possibly still some heavy rain for much of the night into the morning across East Anglia and southeast England. So here a wet start to the day. Tomorrow it will be mild tonight. Temperatures for most staying in double figures. Now tomorrow some of that rain still lingering on across the far southeast of England. It will turn more showery. Elsewhere it's drier and it's brighter, still mild.
Any questions after the news from Hope Valley College in Derbyshire? This is BBC Radio 4, 92 to 95 FM, 198 longwave, on digital radio and on BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 1 o'clock. This is Tom Sanders. The family of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny are demanding that the authorities hand over his body after being formally notified of his death.
Alexei's prison just lied to his lawyer and his mother that the body is there, and so we don't have any clue where he is now.
Ukraine's President Zelensky has told Western leaders at a security conference that Russia is waging war against any rules at all. The Scottish Labour Party conference has formally backed calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. A dire display by England's cricketers have left them facing defeat in the third test in India. The family of the Russian political activist Alexei Navalny have confirmed his death, but say they don't know where his body is. The Russian prison service announced he had died yesterday. He was serving a lengthy sentence inside a Siberian jail. His spokeswoman, Kira Yarmish, said his mother had received an official notification about his death, but had been unable to locate his remains. Here's our Eastern Europe correspondent, Sarah Rainsford.
Alexei Navalny's mother had to travel all the way to the Arctic prison where he was held to get official confirmation of her son's death. But there is still no information on how the opposition politician died so suddenly behind bars. He'd appeared in court via video link just the previous day, with no obvious sign of sickness. And Navalny's spokeswoman, Kira Yarmish, has told the BBC they still don't have his body.
We don't have any clue where he is now and what is happening to him and when it will be given to the family.
Alexei Navalny was in prison because of his politics and after an attempt to kill him in 2020 with a nerve agent. He was an anti-corruption campaigner who denounced Vladimir Putin and his team as crooks and thieves, and who continued to speak out even in prison. Today, as people came out again in Moscow to lay flowers in Navalny's memory, the police were waiting. When the crowd refused to disperse, the police swooped and dragged people to their vans through the snow. Those spared shouted "Shame on you," but the police cleared the area. In life, Navalny was able to rally large crowds of supporters. The Kremlin doesn't want to risk the real anger at his death spilling out into open protest. So it's clamping down hard.
Volodymyr Zelensky has urged delegates at the Munich Security Conference to increase their military support for Ukraine after his forces pulled out of the key town of Avdiivka. They've been under siege by Russia for months. President Zelensky said the decision had been made to save lives and blamed the retreat on lack of long-range weapons. From Munich, our security correspondent Frank Gardner sent this report.
Flanked by bodyguards and a heavy German police presence, Ukraine's President Zelensky strode into this high-level security summit with an impassioned plea. The West, he said, needed to urgently step up its military support for his country, as its frontline forces face critical shortages on the battlefield. Ukraine's war, he told delegates, was Europe's war.
There is no one for whom the ongoing war in Europe does not pose a threat. This war defies more than just the place of Ukraine or entire Europe in the world. This is Russia's war against any rules at all.
The news of Alexei Navalny's death in an Arctic Russian penal colony continues to resonate here. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, paid tribute to his bravery and said it was a reminder of the ever-present threat from Russia. He told the BBC that if his party came to power after the next election, it would continue its support for Ukraine and, in his words, redouble Britain's support for NATO.
Delegates at the Scottish Labour conference in Glasgow have backed calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The motion demands an end to rocket fire into and out of the territory, the unconditional release of Israeli hostages, the restoration of essential supplies and a pathway to peace. But the move puts Scottish Labour at odds with the party at Westminster. This afternoon, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said the fighting in Gaza had to end, but he stopped short of calling for an immediate ceasefire. Here's our political correspondent, Charlotte Wright.
The Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar has been calling for months for an immediate end to fighting in Gaza. That position has now been formally adopted by his colleagues in Scotland. But in Westminster, the Labour leader Keir Starmer has stopped short of this. Sir Keir has previously called for a sustainable ceasefire, but has faced pressure to explicitly back an immediate one. In an interview at the Munich Security Conference, he did not go that far.
We do need to get to a ceasefire. We all want a ceasefire. The question is, how do we get there? The fighting has to stop. Any sort of rafale must be repelled. We must not allow that to go ahead.
The Labour leader's position on this will be tested next week too. On Wednesday, the Scottish National Party will bring forward a fresh vote on the issue in the House of Commons. In a similar vote last year, Sir Keir suffered a major rebellion, with 56 of his MPs voting for an immediate ceasefire. It's not yet clear how he'll direct his MPs to vote next week.
Tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators are gathering in central London for a march calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The organisers expect as many as 250,000 people to attend the protest, which will take place near the Israeli embassy. Our correspondent Louisa Pilbeam is at Marble Arch, where the protest is getting underway.
The atmosphere here is calm and peaceful, but as you can probably hear, people are being vocal. There are many families with children and it's busy. The demonstration is the first in the area of the Israeli embassy since the protest was held 2 days after the October the 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas, a group designated as a terror organisation by the British government. The Met Police say there will be an exclusion zone of 100 metres around the Israeli embassy, and anyone entering it will be arrested. Around 1,500 officers are on public order duty, policing this march as well as other events.
Hundreds of people are marching through Newport and Port Talbot in South Wales to protest at the proposed loss of thousands of steelworkers' jobs. Last month, Tata Steel said 2,800 jobs across the UK were at risk as it was closing both blast furnaces at its site in Port Talbot. Our reporter George Zielinski is there.
The message from Port Talbot here today is loud and clear: save our steel. Hundreds of Tata workers are expected to gather in the town in support of an industry that's forged communities as well as the steel it's famous for. It comes after Tata announced plans to reduce emissions at the site, putting nearly 2,000 jobs at risk. Tata say the current business is unsustainable, with the existing iron and steel making operation here in Port Talbot contributing to losses of £1.7 million a day. But with so many job losses also being proposed, people here say that's a price they're unwilling to pay.
Sports. India are in full control of the third test against England after a dramatic collapse. And in football, Brentford and Liverpool have kicked off a bumper Premier League weekend. With a roundup of the action, here's Jonathan McKeith.
Yes, it's been a very difficult day for England's men's cricketers in India. Ben Stokes' side suffered that dramatic collapse from 207 for 2 to 319 all out. The hosts then had an excellent session with the bat, opposing Rajkot with a lead of 322 runs with 8 second innings wickets remaining. More from our correspondent Jonathan Allen.
Yeah, pretty bad day for England. They really should have set their stalls out to bat the day. They scored over 300 runs. They'd have had a nice little lead over India had that been the case, but it wasn't, of course. They got bowled out. Some really poor shot selection there, 8 for 112. India have closed on 196 for 2. So they lead by 322 runs. Jaiswal had to retire hurt. He's done his back. He was on 104, he was on 155. But Gill, who's there on 65, and that Watchman Cooley is on 3. So, what can England do tomorrow? They'll be desperate for wickets. 196 for 2. That's a lead for India of 322 runs with 2 days still to go.
Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola says he's expecting one of the toughest games of the season this afternoon when they host Chelsea in the Premier League. It ended 4-4 when the sides met in the reverse fixture at Stamford Bridge back in November. Guardiola isn't expecting things to be any more straightforward this time around.
It's an exceptional team. It's exceptional in all departments. One of the toughest games we have until the end of the season. He's playing really good. Last games he's playing really, really good. They have everything, intense and quality, and most of the teams define if they are able to don't lose the balls, and it's difficult to find a player that can lose the balls. And we're a really good team, tough one tomorrow.
In the early kick-off, leaders Liverpool have just gone 1-0 up at Brentford. And in Rugby League, the former dual-code England international Sam Burgess will take charge of his first game as head coach of Warrington Wolves this afternoon as they travel to play Catalan Dragons in their Super League opener.
Jonathan McKeith. The Star Wars script, which Harrison Ford left at the London flat he rented during filming in the 1970s, is going up for auction today. The incomplete and unbound draft, for what was then titled The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, is being sold by the flat's owners. Jonathan Terode from Excalibur Auctions says it's a big deal.
This is the first time one of these scripts has come to market attributed to one of the 3 lead characters, and the story behind it is incredible because they refer to it as a wonderful summer with Harrison staying with them. They would drink in the garden with him. Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher would come round and see him, but they just kept all these bits and pieces as a memento of that time.
Japan's defence ministry says it will allow recruits to have longer hair from April to try to attract more young people to the military. In current regulations, male recruits are required to have a buzz cut and females must have short hair. The headlines again. The family of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny are demanding that the authorities hand over his body after being formally notified of his death. Ukraine's President Zelensky has told Western leaders at a security conference that Russia is waging war against any rules at all. BBC News.
On BBC Radio 4, I want to talk about a very different revolution that is taking place right now, quietly sweeping the globe without bloodshed or conflict. I'm Misha Glennie, and I'm telling the story of the microchip and how it has been driving geopolitics for over half a century. Why have wars been won and are still being fought over something no bigger than a fingerprint? And how will this minuscule technology decide our futures? The rise and rise of the microchip on Radio 4 of BBC Sounds begins next Thursday afternoon at 4.
Now on Radio 4, time for Any Questions with Alex Forsyth.
Hello and welcome to Hope Valley, a haven for hikers and lovers of all things outdoors, with some of the finest views and villages in the Peak District. We are at Hope Valley College, a comprehensive school that opened in 1958 after decades of campaigning for a school for this rural community. Now it has 550 students who travel from across Derbyshire, as well as Sheffield and Greater Manchester. And in true Peak District style, its curriculum incorporates outdoor pursuits, including orienteering and mountain biking. Panel, we won't make you partake. On our panel tonight, we have Esther McVey, the Conservative MP for Tatton and Minister without portfolio in the Cabinet Office. Unofficially, she's been called the Minister for Common Sense. Esther trained as a lawyer, then worked as a producer and broadcaster before first being elected in 2010. She was a minister in both David Cameron and Theresa May's governments, and before her recent return to government, she hosted a show on GB News. Alison McGovern is the Labour MP for Wirral South and Shadow Minister for Employment and Social Security. She grew up on the Wirral and studied philosophy at University in London. Before becoming an MP, Alison used to work as a House of Commons researcher and handled communications at Network Rail. She was also Gordon Brown's Parliamentary Private Secretary. Mark Littlewood is Director of Popular Conservatism, a campaign group which was launched last week by the former Prime Minister Liz Truss and says it advocates for conservative values. Previously, Mark was Director General of the Institute for Economic Affairs think tank for 14 years. He's also a former campaigns director for the human rights group Liberty, and until 2007, he was head of media for the Liberal Democrats. And Sonia Soda is a columnist and chief leader writer for The Observer. She's also worked for the think tanks Demos and the Institute for Public Policy Research and the consumer group Which, and she was advisor to the former Labour leader Ed Miliband until 2012. Sonia has written for a variety of publications, including the Sunday Times, the Daily Mail, the New Statesman and Prospect magazine, and she's a trustee of the philanthropic foundation The Trust for London, a charity which seeks to reduce poverty and inequality. Hope Valley, please welcome your Any Questions panel. Right, let's get things underway with our first, which comes from Joe Powis. Hello, Joe.
Anna Politkovskaya, Foreign Minister, the people of Ukraine, and today Alexei Navalny, who will stop Putin murdering his critics.
Joe, thank you for your question. So you mentioned there a journalist who was murdered in 2006 by contract killers, a former Deputy Prime Minister who was shot inside of the Kremlin, and of course Alexei Navalny, who was reported dead on Friday. Already, President Joe Biden has said that while the US still doesn't have formal confirmation, he's no doubt that Putin is responsible. Esther McVey.
Reading those lists of names there, it just highlights what a tyrant, what an aggressor, a ruthless individual Putin is. And there can be no capitulation when you're dealing with somebody like that. Hence, I'm proud of our country standing up and supporting Ukraine. And I think Putin's taken to the airwaves as well with his views on what he thinks about Biden and how he supports Biden. I thought, gosh, he's a master of the dark arts too. You can't believe a word that he says, and it makes you question everything that he does and he says. So I'm saying we need to stand up to the tyrants of the world. And you're quite right, you can't let a bully keep bullying, because otherwise they don't stop.
Esther, you talked there about the government's support for Ukraine. Do you have concern that perhaps some of that support across the wider West is wavering? We've seen, for example, the difficulties in the US with getting another aid package through in support for Ukraine.
Well, people will be thinking, where does it go from here? And I guess you've always got to think, what is the end game? But we've got to stand shoulder to shoulder against a tyrant, against a bully, and that's what we have done. And I think we were first in there, first to support them, and I believe we do need to do that until the bitter end.
Esther, thank you. Alison McGovern.
Yeah, I think Joe puts the question in those terms, rightly reading out those names, and the question, who will stand up against Putin? The answer, we all must. We all must. We've got to stand firm with the people of Ukraine. It's absolutely appalling what has happened to an incredibly brave man who was prepared to stand up against Putin, and it's dreadful news to hear today. I think we have to be absolutely clear in our support for the people of Ukraine. I'm proud that we have, as a nation, supported that, and that we've provided training through the British Armed Forces. I think that's a good thing. We have to keep firm, and we all must stand up against Putin.
A tweet from the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace on Friday listed a list of potential actions that the UK could take, including, for example, further sanctions on Russia. Is that something you would support, Labour would support?
I haven't seen that tweet, but to be honest, I think we should look at every possible avenue. As I've said, we've got to stand firm in our support for the people in Ukraine and look at every avenue. So I haven't seen Ben's tweet, but I'm sure that this will be discussed in the House of Commons next week, and we will be looking for those opportunities to show that support and do more to stand up against Putin.
Thank you. Mark Littlewood.
Putin leads a vile, kleptocratic government that is run along the sort of lines that you'd expect a mafia outfit to be run, and behaves in that fashion, added on with a dose of rather unpleasant far-right Russian nationalism. I don't disagree with what Esther and Alison have said about standing firm in alliance with Ukraine, but that wasn't quite Joe's question. It's who will stop him in Russia. And if you want to bring that about, it will have to be the Russian people themselves. I don't have any particular insight in how to assist them, get to them, or support the opposition, which Putin is determined to execute. But that's ultimately where change needs to come from in Russia. Even if the West stands firm and we prevail in Ukraine, we need to help the opposition in Russia to somehow dislodge Putin.
Right, but how do you do that in what has become an increasingly repressive regime?
Well, I mean, I think you've got to provide aid and support alliances with those who wish to protest the Putin regime. We have done these sort of things before. We assisted dissidents in the Soviet Union as the West. I want us to now do the same. This isn't just a regime that we might find morally unpleasant, it's a regime which is actually threatening to international security, far beyond what's happening in the